Hi everyone, my name is Essen, and you are listening to the Brown History Podcast. We're at episode 41 now, and our guest today is Dur E Aziz Amna. She is about to release her debut fiction novel, American Fever, and you can pre-order it now. I was lucky enough to get an early copy, and let me tell you, it's a great, entertaining read. I can see a movie adaptation happening real soon. However, I first noticed her a while back from her nonfiction essays, which I'm a huge fan of. It's a great episode, no spoilers, don't worry. And also, before we begin, there's a website, brownhistorypodcast.com, and if you're enjoying Brown History, consider being a patron. Your help makes a really big difference, I promise. Alright, I think we're ready to go. Let's begin.
Okay, lovely. And how long are you planning for this?
Usually, maybe 40 minutes,
Okay.
45 minutes.
Okay.
Depends on how much you like to talk.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, sounds
Okay. Well, first off, I want to say congratulations to your debut novel, American
good.
Fever, and also congrats on making it on the list Forbes 30 under 30. So that's a
Oh,
big deal
thank you.
too.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
This is your debut novel. Do you want to explain the story, or can I try and you can make me maybe correct me if I'm wrong or add something if you want?
Yeah. No, I would be more than happy to have you explain it. I feel like I'm gonna be explaining it enough.
So it's a story about a Pakistani teenage girl named Hira who enrolls in a student exchange program and ends up living with an American family for a year in not New York City, not San Francisco or any other cool city, but a random small town in Oregon.
hmm
It's a very funny, entertaining book, but it also kind of has this deep perspective on these two cultures and how to navigate between these two worlds. How's that?
Yeah, no, that's it.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
I always love to read books. Thanks to this podcast, I get the experience of talking to the author after reading the book. But I think this is one of those rare moments where I think I'm speaking to the main character of the novel because you also lived a year in Oregon too in a student exchange program. So I bet you probably get this question a lot. But how much of this is an autobiography?
Yeah, no. It's definitely I have to like steel myself because the book comes out in 2 weeks and I feel like I'm going to get this question a lot. I already do. And it's a very fair one, obviously, because like a lot of debut novels, this one leans heavily into my own biography. And so as you said, I did the same exchange program. This was 2008, 2009. So it's a slightly different timeline from the novel itself.
Mhm.
Um, and the initial setup of like a girl moving from Rawalpindi in Pakistan to rural Oregon, that is all very much taken from my life. But then the events that actually happened to her there, and the people that she meets, especially like my host, my relationship with my host family, the actual one, was far less complicated than the one obviously presented in the novel. So the
Mhm.
people that she meets are all very different. So that's when like all the sort of fictionalization starts.
So what was your experience like in Oregon for you? And this was post 9/11, so you had
Yeah,
that kind of issue to deal with.
yeah. So um I the funny thing is because it was so remote that
Uh-huh.
I feel like perhaps I'm sure obviously 9/11 and especially people who lived here during the time and like the years immediately following it had to deal with it a lot more, and perhaps even more so. And like I feel like Oregon, the place that I lived in, was so remote that it really didn't come up that much. It was just such a and that's why I chose to write about it because it was such a unique experience. Since then I went back to Pakistan and then I came back here for college, and since then I've lived in that like more what a lot of people from outside the US think of the US as, like, New York and New Jersey and like those more cosmopolitan or more the places that make it to the news more.
Mhm.
And so but the experience there was just so different from that.
How did you, again, well, in the book, Hira's parents are kind of supportive, but also kind of scared and nervous.
Yeah,
How did your parents allow you, especially for a Pakistani girl in a conservative country,
yeah.
how did your parents allow you to go a year in this random town?
Yeah, honestly, like the more I think about it now, it's a mystery to me because at the time, like you just sort of something happens and you go along with it and you don't think too much about it. A lot of this retrospection obviously happens retrospectively. But I don't, and there were so many other girls who went on there were like, my batch was, I was one of 60 people, and I think it was almost 50-50 between women and girls and boys. And so I don't like, I think about it now and I'm like, I don't know if I would let my kid do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're a new mother now, right?
Yeah.
Would you let your child go off for a year?
I don't know. It feels, I really think my parents were very brave. And everyone's parents who let them do that were very brave in doing that, because I can't imagine. And especially, again, as I said, like, you're not going to, like, you're not going to a family friend's house. You're not going to a place that your parents have been to or even know the name of. I was placed in Oregon. Like, that was the very first time I heard the word Oregon. So yeah, it's a very brave decision.
And you're a girl, which
Yeah. No, and there was
another level.
And there was obviously definitely, like, I remember my a few of my uncles and even my grandfather being like, why would you send such a young girl away? But I think my parents, for them, it was very much like, this is going to be good for you, and that classic, like, oh, you sometimes have to do things that are hard for you so that you can, like, succeed in life and whatnot.
True. Speaking of your experiences in America, I'm going to read a line from your Instagram that you wrote about your experience. So much of my understanding of class, how it transcends nations, belonging, how it's a myth, and culture, how it's a farce, stems from that 1 year I spent in the Pacific Northwest. Can you tell me more about, like, what you learned from that 1 year in regards to this sentence? Class, culture, belonging.
Yeah, no, I think that's, what's really funny is when I was writing, I wrote that, and then I don't know if we decided on this podcast later, and I was like, I really hope Essen brings that line up, because I really want to. So this is perfect. Yeah, no, so I think there's a scene in the book where Hira, the protagonist, is asked by, like, the church that her host mother attends, that, like, oh, can you put on a presentation for us about Islam or about Eid? And she initially hesitates, but then, like, the pastor really wants her to, so then she does it. And while she's doing it, she has this, like, she realizes how performative she sounds to herself, because a lot of the things that she's describing, like Chandrat and Eid and what you eat for Eid, and a lot of those things, she realizes that, like, without the context of home, they just become these, like, props that you're setting up for someone else to like understand your life, right? And these are not things that you were anchoring your identity to before you left home, but now suddenly they've become the markers of home.
That's interesting.
And so like, how much do you hold on to that, and how much do you, like, I mean, I think this is an experience that happens to a lot of people who move, that certain products almost, or like, okay, your personality becomes turmeric. Like, what does that mean? Or your personality becomes chai or chai tea, not chai tea. And it's all just, it's strange, because those were not the things that you considered important to yourself or your sense of self before you left home, but suddenly they become markers for your identity. And so how do you navigate that? How much of it do you play into, and how much of it do you refuse to play into? And the other thing about class is, like, the protagonist, again, is she comes from, like, a privileged background in Pakistan, and she's not, like, rich, but she's extremely comfortable, and so she moved from that background to a very poor part of the country. And again, that sort of is against a lot of immigrants' expectations of the US, where you think that's, the land of riches. And that's why, like, a lot of people move here for the opportunity. But Hira actually has the experience of moving down the class ladder when she moves to her, not necessarily her host family, but the community around her is very poor. But what does that mean, right? Because a lot of the people that she sees around her still have, because of perhaps, like, I don't know if it's because of the consumerist culture of America. People still have phones that she couldn't imagine having back home. The houses seem nicer because there are certain amenities available there, but she still knows deep inside her that she's in some ways she's still better off than a lot of the people that she's around.
Right. What about religion? I don't know if it's okay for me to ask you this, but growing up, what sect of Islam did you grow up with? And was that a part of your identity, or did it become more a part of your identity? Or was it something you let go when you went to America for a year? Because religion is one of the things that Hira explores. And I wanted to know how you felt, or was that very similar to your experiences?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I grew up Sunni Muslim, the most vanilla kind. But and it's weird because obviously when you grow up Sunni in a country like Pakistan, you just think you're like Muslim.
You're the majority.
Yeah, exactly.
Sunni is the majority in Pakistan, if anybody wants to know.
Yeah, very much so. And so you don't really think of, you're like, you do that classic, oh, I'm just a Muslim. Something that, because you don't have to explain yourself or even think about yourself in that context. But again, because it's Pakistan and under like that general, like more South Asian Islam of the Sufis and the saints and all of that. So there was a lot of that influence in my upbringing as well. And so I can talk about Hira's experience. There are similarities, obviously, between hers and mine. But when Hira moves to the US, there's a sense in her that, again, because of that thing that I was talking about, culture and tradition, and particularly sort of, God, what's the word? There's times when I just like forget
It's okay.
Something. Like when you do certain things,
rituals.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, rituals. And so she more and more, she like doesn't understand the point of the rituals when they're divorced from the society around you. That is also like, for instance, I think a lot of people find fasting, unless you're around family, a lot of people find fasting very sort of isolating.
True. Yeah. Unless you're with your family.
Yeah. If then you don't have, because if like, I remember fasting in Pakistan, obviously you like, everyone wakes up together, you hear the azan or you hear the siren go off, which means it's time to stop eating now. In the evening, there's like people come over for dinner, for the iftar and whatnot. And so when you suddenly try to fast all by yourself, there's the aspect of, yes, you're fasting for God, which obviously if you're extremely pious, that's the only thing that matters. But if you're not as pious, you do need the support of a community around you, or people around you who are doing the same, or at least people around you who get the significance of what you're doing. And so she struggles a lot with that, because when she moves, there's Ramzan right after, and she has to figure out like, okay, how much of this has any meaning to me now that everyone around me is, completely divorced from it.
Yeah, and finds it strange.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now that you have a child, how do you conclude in explaining the same rituals, if you want to your child? Because, my wife is pregnant 5 months now, and I'm wondering, like, there are things, thank you. There are things that in like the religion and the culture where I don't think it makes any sense, and it's kind of weird and strange. And do I just kind of pass this on and let him figure it out, or do I just like explain to him? It's very complicated. Have you concluded on how you would teach your child, if you would?
Yeah, no, I think I definitely haven't concluded. It's I feel like there's no conclusion.
Right. That's fair.
My first son, my firstborn, was he's 2 years old now, and my daughter's just 7 weeks. So I think that for a lot of people, I don't know. It's because the other day my father was on the phone with me, and he was like, so what are you going to do about Quran? or what are you going to do about like how are they going to learn how to pray? And again, these are things that came so naturally, and of
Well,
course
just to clarify, you're raising them in America.
yes,
So you
yeah,
are the source of that window to Pakistan.
yeah.
So you have this kind of great responsibility as a mother, as a Pakistani mother, and you are, I guess, yeah, you're their only source. So it's kind of a lot of responsibility and weight on you from your
Yeah,
parents.
exactly. And well, also because my husband's Portuguese American, so there it's not as if you can rely on both spouses for that. And but again, because of people, like anyone who's moved obviously knows that it can be very complicated, because your own relationship with those things can be complicated as well. Like I was the way I was taught the Quran was through this Quran teacher, this Qari Saab, who would come over, and he was sort of brutal. He's still part of my nightmares, because he would and my parents were very clear. Like I almost admired the clarity. They were like, no, the only way you can learn the Quran is through getting hit or getting, and it's like, now I think about it, and that's wild to me, that you think that that's the way you should learn the holy book.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so to the point is that my own relationship with that is I'm still figuring out. And so how much of that, like, I was very, to my father on the phone, I said very clearly, like, I'm definitely not having someone else teach them, because because I don't know, I think with religion, it's so much of it is extremely personal, and yet you can get, with the wrong influence, you can just be so entirely misled that that's one of the things that I'm like super paranoid about.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
better or worse. Like, I think obviously there can be a lot to be gained by having that community, or by having someone else teach your kids things that you either might not have access to, you might not have the time to, you might
True.
not be a very good teacher. So I think it's sort of a balance that everyone has to strike for themselves.
One of the weird things about learning to read the Quran was that they put so much emphasis on learning the Quran in Arabic,
Oh yeah.
but not enough to explain to you the English meaning or the English
Yeah.
translation. Like, so I read it and I have no idea what I read the whole time. That's the weirdest part I found.
Yeah. No, it's really wild. And I remember having this conversation. Because at some point, the only good thing, actually, I shouldn't say that, that's blasphemous, but like one of the good things that came out of those Quran lessons was that at some point, I think I had finished reading the Quran, as you said, without understanding a single word of it twice. And so the Qari Sahib was like, okay, would you guys want to read the translation now? And so that was really cool, because um, like three of us started reading the Quran with the Urdu translation. And so that was the very first time that it was the Arabic up top, and then like in smaller script it was the Urdu translation of every verse. So that was really cool. But I remember us telling my father about that, and I was like, oh, now I can actually just read it in translation, so I don't need to read the Arabic. And he was mortified. He was like, no, beta. I think the import of it was like, you get the savab, which is like the reward,
The good points.
only if you exactly, yeah, you accrue loyalty points only if you read it in Arabic, which it's weird.
Speaking of Urdu, one of the really cool things that Hira goes through is she develops an appreciation of her language, Urdu. And I wanted to know if you have the same. I think I'm pretty sure you have the same appreciation of Urdu, and I want to know where your appreciation comes from. And people who kind of listening and take granted of Urdu and don't really, and just see it as as a way to speak to your parents. What do you think they're missing out on not really developing their Urdu and really going back and reading the poetry and the stories and the novels and the words that come from knowing your Urdu?
Yeah. So I think this sort of ties in with this like larger there's the conversation in like publishing about how, you know, we shouldn't italicize foreign words, or we shouldn't like writers should be allowed to put in like words from their own languages if they're from a language that is not English. And I think that's all really cool, but I think that's like very much the tip of the iceberg, because it doesn't matter if, or these are strong words, but I don't think it matters a lot if you know like a few random words here and there, and you can like sort of like pop them into your writing to sort of like give it an authentic flavor or whatever you want to call it. If you're not actually deeply engaging with that language or getting influences from that language into your writing, like, are you reading, even if it's in translation? I know that at this point there's a lot of people who can't access the original. So I think like the language matters, but also are you reading other writers in that language, and are you like sort of taking the influence from the stories that they're telling, from the folk tales of that language or that culture? And it's a much wider net than just the basic, you know, having like food items mentioned in a without translation or whatever. And I think that ironically, some of that, even for me, happened once I moved here. And perhaps that is also a common experience for people, that you take a lot of these things for granted. You don't realize that like once you move, a lot of these things, instead of just being sort of like again, I'm forgetting the word, but like, you know, that just the background of your life, it's going to be something that you're going to have to actively reach out for, and like actively engage with. Otherwise, there's going to be no one who does it for you.
Right. You know, when I was reading your book, I was thinking of all the South Asian novels that take place in America, and they're usually either a story about an immigrant coming into America, or it's a story about a diaspora person living in America. But this novel kind of has this new perspective that I don't think I've seen it before, where you're like a visitor, I guess, like you know, from a young visitor. When you were writing the novel, did you know that you were going this is like a perspective that really isn't explored much?
Yeah, I think honestly, that was one of the things that gave me comfort while writing it, because I think that, as you said, there's such, and really like a lot of really great literature from South Asia that is about either the diaspora or someone coming in as an immigrant. And so it felt very intimidating to sort of like stack my book with that tradition. And one of the things that gave me comfort was that, okay, like Hira is in this unique position of being a visitor who has 1 foot here, 1 foot there, and she's very much planning on going back. So she's not moving there. On the other hand, I think the book also had a bit of a hard time selling, especially in the US, because of that very problem. I think my favorite stories from the really terrible process of submissions was this editor, who shall not be named, who told me that, you know, it would be a much better story if you made her American.
Wow.
And which is funny, because that's really not the point.
No, not at all.
The whole story is about her move here. But I think that speaks to like there was some confusion about, okay, where do we place this story? Because it's not an immigrant story per se, and it's not about like a hyphenated American either. So where do we place this story?
When you're writing the story, and there's a lot of terms, traditions, and actions that are very South Asian rooted, and as a South Asian, I can understand what you're talking about, but someone who's not South Asian can get confused, right? So how do you decide how to explain, how much do you want to explain something, you know?
Yeah.
Because I always wondered, like, you just write Ramadan, or do you write Ramadan and then you explain a whole paragraph of what this is? And how do you find that balance?
Well, firstly, I say Ramzan, which is the South
Ramzan, yes. Right. You know what? I grew up in an Arabic.
No. I totally, that's actually, I don't, I was just, that was a joke because I feel like that's such a weirdly hotly debated topic.
I
You
know.
could,
Ramadan. We'll have an
yeah,
episode on this one day.
exactly. Yeah. That's a different episode. But no, I think that's a great question. And I think that a lot of, sometimes people have a knee-jerk reaction of, oh, I'm not going to explain anything, but I don't think that's really fruitful either because, your audience hopefully is not just that like very like white American that you're not trying to like play into, or you're trying to like show, oh, like I don't care what you think, or I don't care how much you explain. Understand, your audience hopefully is people from a lot of other languages as well. Like if there's someone, in Nigeria reading the book, or in the Indonesia reading the book, they might also not understand a lot of the references. So when you get like very, very minute, I feel like it's turtles all the way down. Like a lot of the things that you grew up with, perhaps no one really understands it except your very, very close family. Perhaps there are rituals that only you and your family followed, or only were particular to, like, for instance, I'm from the Potawatomi region in Pakistan, which is where like Islam, not Islamabad as much, but Rawalpindi and like the places south of it, that's where they fall. And so maybe there are certain things that we do, or maybe there's a certain dialect of Punjabi that's followed there that's actually very different from even the rest of the country, the rest of the region, whatever you want to call it. And so I think, I don't know how to, going back to the question of like, how do you figure out how much to explain? I think, I don't know. It's honestly, it's really tricky, because I think with a lot of the words in here, I never offered an explanation, but there was a certain point where I wrote the word kabar khana, which means a junkyard. And I wrote it and I didn't explain it in that moment, but then I had this niggling feeling that, okay, that's a pretty, like, if you're writing in English, that is a very specific word to not explain. And so later on, like a few pages later, when that word it appears again, I just write in English, kabarkhana, junkyard. And so
do you ever go, you know what, they can just Google it, I don't care, moving on?
Yeah. I think that yeah, I mean, the Googling, I mean, it's weird because I know that a lot of people say that, right? I never Google shit when I'm like reading, and I think that a lot of the times you have to be okay, especially if you're going to read literature from a lot of different places around the world, you have to be okay with just not knowing things. And just kind of accepting that, okay, there are certain things that I might not be privy to, and that's okay. The author still very much, because she's writing in English, she has decided that she wants to share the story with a pretty large audience. So like the doors are open. I think the reader still has to feel that way. And that's both on the writer's part, but also more importantly on the reader's part. There's a book, this is for you to read. Perhaps there are a few things that you don't understand in there. That's fine.
I first noticed you from your nonfiction essays, which I'm a big fan of.
Thank you.
Is there a difference between writing nonfiction and fiction for you?
Yeah, it's yeah, no, that's a great question. So because I started writing when I was young, I started writing for like newspapers initially, for those children's supplements that come with newspapers. Like once a week there was I think there was a magazine called Us in Pakistan that I would write a lot for. And so my training, if you want to call it that, has always been on the nonfiction side. And so American Fever is actually my first fiction project that I ever started, even like short stories wise. Like this is the very first thing that I decided, okay, this is going to be fiction.
And you did a whole book.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Went into the deep end. But it's, I don't know. I think part of me, I think nonfiction does come much more easily to me, and perhaps in the long term, that is what I'll return more and more to. There's something very natural about writing a personal essay, and it's weird because I think for a lot of people that is not the case, because it's obviously it's such a vulnerable position to like just sort of open up your life to other people. Somehow I'm okay with that, especially because I think that a lot of the fiction or nonfiction that I write, I try not to make it extremely. It's not. I don't really believe in being extremely confessional, like, oh, this is the very worst thing that happened to me, and like, let me tell you all about it. I know that there's a huge value in that, and a lot of people do it, and they do it really well.
Yeah.
For me, nonfiction is a way of, even when it's a personal essay, for approaching a topic that is extremely relevant to a lot of other people. So a lot of my nonfiction aims, at least, to be like social and cultural, and not necessarily political, but like, about issues that I think are beyond just myself.
Well, this is the question. I don't know your family personally, but generally speaking, the culture of Pakistan is very conservative, and people don't really open up or talk about what's going on in their lives, or at least don't publicize it to the neighborhood because, shame and whatever. Do you find that growing up in a conservative culture like Pakistan has affected your writing, in the sense that writing can also be about kind of confessing the things that are going in your life, or dealing with the deep issues that are going with your life? Does it make you, I mean, for me personally, I find like it holds me back, because writing is it's a naked process and makes you feel naked. And growing up in the culture of Pakistan, it feels like I'm doing something wrong. So I was wondering if you go through that too, or you've passed it, or it never occurred to you.
Yeah, the one thing that I think I try to be wary of is being too culturally deterministic. So thinking that, okay, I'm a certain way exclusively because I grew up in a culture that was supposedly this way, which I'm completely with you. I don't think anyone in their right minds would call Pakistan anything but conservative. So there's no question that is true. I think that the ways those things affect us, though, are like more complicated than just a like A leads to B leads to C thing. Because on the one hand, yes, there's perhaps like, you obviously, you don't advertise how you feel, but like, do you even do that in the US? I feel like I find a lot of spaces in the US also very, like, for instance, I currently am taking I'm recording this podcast from my in-laws house, and they live in suburban New Jersey, and I find American suburbs to be extremely private. I think that, like, everyone like kind of keeps to themselves. No one really like tells each other what's happening in their lives. And on the other hand, I think in Pakistan, like, I was talking to my brother yesterday about how, even for instance, like death in Pakistan, right? Like anytime there's a funeral, there's this we call it like bain karna, which is like you wail and you like loudly mourn, which I think it would truly just like shock someone in the US if they heard that sound. And it's still, even to me, it's a very haunting sound. And so in some ways the culture there is way more expressive than here. But when it comes to the influence on my writings, I think there is maybe, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't want to be deterministic. I think there's a certain, like, it might not be an only Pakistani thing. Maybe it's like sort of like buttoned upness that I think I try to keep in my writing. I don't like to just like put it all out there. And I think that is also because for me, the reader deserves certain parts of me. I don't think that the reader deserves, or no, deserves maybe might be the wrong word, but I don't think the reader needs all of me. So I think that I can choose very carefully what I put on paper. And the interesting thing is, sometimes, like, for instance, you've asked me a few questions, or like sometimes I get, like, with very smart readers, I get questions that it's like, oh, I didn't know you figured that out, and so, like, sometimes the reader is like able to figure out even more stuff than what I put on paper. But I think that it's always your decision, how much of yourself you like, because it is exposure, right?
Right,
It's
right.
like you are exposing yourself for better or for worse. And the hope is that like the cost of that exposure is worth it. Is worth like having someone else relate to you, having someone else figure something about themselves out that through your words. And I mean, I think if done properly, it's definitely worth it.
How is the writing culture in Pakistan as opposed to America? Because you're one of the few people who kind of experience both sides. So what's it like being a writer in Pakistan?
Yeah. I mean, I unfortunately I had a very because I moved here when I was 18, and so I was still very much it was I actually weirdly enough I had a really really good experience because I worked with these magazines that would I remember I wasn't expecting it because if I mean if you know anything about writing in the US, especially right now, it's like frequently, especially for magazines, it's extremely underpaid, obviously, if you get paid at all. And so I remember writing my first article for the newspaper in Pakistan, and 2 weeks later, this check appears for me, and I think it was for I don't even remember the amount, but to me, it just felt like I was suddenly like I would never have to work in my life. It
That's
was
funny.
I mean, it obviously did not last at all, but it was I had a really really good experience. I don't know because of obviously the bifurcation, and in fact, it's more than just a binary because obviously there's people writing in Urdu, in English, and then a lot of the regional languages. So I can't speak at all to what the experience of like writing and publishing in Urdu would be. In English too, I think unfortunately there's I've heard from people who've tried to get published in Pakistan in like in for instance like English books. It's still pretty hard, and actually one of the reasons which might be also relevant too because it's Brown history is that the sort of movement of books between India and Pakistan is very I think the state of it is very bad because I think just the nature of things. Sometimes you're not allowed to bring books in from India. So if, for instance, and given that India is within South Asia, it's obviously the hub of publishing. So like HarperCollins and Penguin Random House, all these big publishing houses, their outposts in South Asia are always in India. And so the biggest, if you want to get published with HarperCollins India as a Pakistani, I think a lot of editors in India are actually very open to it. But then once you get your book published, your book's not available in Pakistan. And so it's really so a lot of Pakistani writers actually prefer to get published in the UK or whatever, because then at least your
You have
book,
access to it.
yeah, your book can make its way out to Pakistan.
That's
So
very
yeah,
interesting.
I think a lot of people find that to be very it's a very hard market right now because of these issues. But I mean, I think that because at this point we've had, a lot of years of first rule by the British and then like just this general emphasis on English, for better or for worse. But what that does mean is that now there's like a sizable population that obviously reads in English, wants to read in English, wants to write in English. So there's a lot of very, very exciting writers in Pakistan. I think there's
Any recommendations?
Yeah, no, I one of my really good friends, Sadia Khatri, she's pretty active on Instagram as well, so people can look her up on social media. She has a website as well. She's really, really good. I love her essays. There's a writer called Amna Chaudhry who writes really well. These are like the people that I'm thinking of at the top of my head. But there's so many more. And I think that especially because of social media now, there's people can like, there's so much more freedom in how much you can post, and you don't need to, publish a lot of times through. There's actually given talking about more traditional forms, the Alif Review in Pakistan, they publish a lot of English, like really good writing in English. Yeah, I'm thinking
What about older from
the old guard.
from the last era?
Yeah.
writers from the older
Yeah.
generation.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that I actually what I instead of just sort of like, there's the names that everyone knows.
All right.
Like Amila Shamsi, Mohsin Hamid, Muhammad Hanif, these are all the people that like were sort of, I mean, that still are very much right. And Mohsin Hamid, I think, just had a book out. But I think instead of talking about those people, because anyone who does even like this the smallest Google search on Pakistani writers in English would come across those people. I think I would
True. You're right.
encourage people to look into translations by Pakistani writers. And this is obviously if you can actually read in Urdu, that opens up an entire world to you. But I feel like that might be a very, very small percentage of the people who listen to this podcast. And so I think that for people who want to read Pakistani literature but cannot access it in Urdu, there's really good translations now. A lot of the times they're actually done in India because obviously Urdu is a language obviously shared across borders. And so I know that Manto's short stories are really well translated into English. I think the collection is called Mottled Dawn. And there's translations of Ismat Jughtai. There are translations of Yusufi. I am forgetting his full name, but I've read him in Urdu and he's really, really wonderful. And there's translations of his work in English as well.
Very cool. My last question.
Yeah.
My last question is, where do you think Hira is going to be in 20 years?
That's a fantastic question. That's really just it. And you know what's really funny is that the book, I don't know if you noticed, but it's told from the perspective of an older Hira.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And I went back and forth so much on whether to reveal, or even I don't even know if I have it figured out, but to like place her. So like, should the reader know where she's writing from? Is she writing from, a New Jersey suburb, or is she writing from back home in Pakistan? I think I intentionally left it open-ended because
I don't want to give spoilers away, but yeah, it is very open-ended.
Yeah, exactly. So so it is told from like, I mean, I guess it is maybe a spoiler, but the older protagonist, the older narrator is never placed. So we never know where she's writing from and what her situation in life is. And I think I wanted to have it that way. And I think that's why I'll like probably not give a clear answer to this, because I want the reader to be able to, because the book is so much about the ambiguity of like home and leaving home and returning home and whether you can ever return home and whatnot, that I think giving a very clear answer to that sort of like takes away from the reader's imagination a bit.
Yeah, and it's not black and white either. We don't get to see what, like, she doesn't really pick a side.
Right.
She, they both kind of affect her, and she kind of becomes an outsider, I find, for both countries, for Pakistan and America. But so it's very curious to know what decisions she makes in the future. Does she still live in Pakistan, or does she move to America? I mean, I can only look at your life and make my own assumptions based on that.
Right.
But other than that, like, it's hard to, I mean, you could literally make a sequel, but yeah, I guess you don't want to give any clues or anything where you think
no,
or at least where she lives.
Yeah, no, I think I'll let the reader figure that out. Yeah.
Do you have any future projects in the works?
I'm working on, it's very, very much in its infancies, but I'm working on a second novel that's set in the 80s and early 90s in Pakistan. And it's about a broadcaster with Pakistan Television, the state TV, and she's a young woman and it's the story of her marriage. So very, very, very different. She will not be coming to the US. She will not be coming to rural Oregon.
All right, that's okay. This was great. Do you have anything you want to add in or plug in?
So much. I really, really, I mean, this is a plug for S, and you're
no. Don't go there.
Work, and honestly, like I'm just so flattered with the questions.
No, it was such a great book. I really enjoyed it. It made me really, I thought it was gonna be like something else, but it was really I really like, I mean, I really found it really interesting, and it really made me think of these perspectives and things like that. Like you're right. Like right now, as you just said, like in a Pakistani funeral, they're so much more expressive than Americans and Canadians. So like I never really thought of that way. And you're right, like it's never really black and white. So it really made me rethink what's going on, I guess.
Oh, I'm so glad, and I feel like your page does that for a lot of people too. It you know, it makes people rethink what South Asia is and what brown is, and so I'm just very, very honored to be here.
No, I can't wait to read your next book, and I hope we can do this again for your
Yeah.
second book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Essen.
Thank you so much. Have a good week.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.